Hey guys, I wanted to take this time to make a brief video to help answer some of the questions that I've been getting about inverse trig. Okay, so the first thing is, what are we really doing here? We are solving for an angle measure. Okay, so when you see that inverse, so sine inverse, for example, of root 2 over 2, what that's literally saying is for what angle theta is the sine of theta equal to root 2 over 2? Okay, so go ahead and copy that down. Pause the video now and take that note. I'm going to erase the notes as I go, so make sure you copy that down. Okay, so for what angle is the sine equal to that value, radical 2 over 2? So what you're doing is solving for a missing angle. Okay, but the problem is that there are more than one angle for which sine equals root 2 over 2. Okay, so for example, sine equals radical 2 over 2 at 45 degrees or pi over 4. Sine also equals radical 2 over 2 here at, that's 135 degrees, or what would that be? 3 pi over 4. Both of those angles, the sine of theta equals root 2 over 2. So if you were asked sine inverse of radical 2 over 2, which one do you pick? Pi over 4, 3 pi over 4? And as it turns out, there are really an infinite number of choices. Okay, so that's the whole point of this chart, this table here. Okay, if you're given a sine inverse or tan inverse problem, these first two here, your answer is either in quadrant 1 or quadrant 4. Okay, and very simply, anytime it asks you sine inverse or tan inverse of a positive, so sine inverse of a positive or tan inverse of a positive number, your answer, the angle, is in Q1. Okay, and this all goes back to CAST. Okay, all students take calculus. Your answer is always positive, always in quadrant 1. Okay, so anytime the answer or the ratio is positive, you're looking for the angle in quadrant 1 in which you get that value. So in this case, or in the example I used before, sine inverse of radical 2 over 2, that's positive. I'm looking in quadrant 1. Sine, which is the y values here, is root 2 over 2 at pi over 4. Okay, so your answer would be pi over 4. All right, but with that being said, there are also negative values. You guys know that when you plug in sine, tan, or cosine into your calculator, you do sometimes get a negative value. Okay, so if you were asked, for example, for sine inverse of negative radical 2 over 2, okay, that's why highlighted in pink is quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. When it is negative, you're looking for the angle in quadrant 4, and so your answer is going to be negative pi over 4. Okay, so essentially, if it's asking for sine inverse or tan inverse of a negative, you're looking in quadrant 4. And remember, all students take calculus, only cosine's positive in quadrant 4. So that's why if you get a negative, sine and tangent are going to have a negative value in quadrant 4, and that's why we use quadrant 4. Okay, so now, why is cosine different? Cosine is different because quadrant 4, the one that we use for the negative values for sine and tangent, cosine is also positive there. Right? Cosine is positive in Q1 and Q4. So like if you were asked for cosine inverse, let's stick with that radical 2 over 2. Well, remember cosine is the x value. Cosine is positive radical 2 over 2 at both pi over 4 and negative pi over 4. So you got to pick the right one. Always quadrant 1 when you're talking about positive. Okay, so that doesn't change. What's different with cosine, so if you're asked for cosine of a positive, just like tangent and sine of a positive, that angle's in quadrant 1. But now, the only thing that's different for cosine is you can't use quadrant 4 for negative, because it's not negative down there. All students take calc, cos is positive, so we go to the closest place that cos is negative. From that initial side, on your initial x-axis side, the closest negative quadrant for cosine would be quadrant 2. Okay, so that's why you use a different set of quadrants for cosine, is because cosine is positive in quadrant 4, unlike the other ones. Okay, so if I give you sine inverse or tangent inverse, and the answer is positive, or the ratio, radical 2 over 2, positive, it's in quadrant 1. Sine or tan inverse of a negative, you're looking for that angle in quadrant 4. So for example, tan inverse of negative, how about negative 1? Okay, remember tan is sine divided by cos, so you would get negative 1 right here, doing sine divided by cos, or y divided by x, and so that angle is negative pi over 4. Okay, and now cosine, when you're asked for cosine of a positive value, also quadrant 1. That's the same for all of them, and that you should remember because all students take calc. Quadrant 1, they're always all positive. But when you're asked for cosine of a negative, so for example, cos inverse of negative 1/2, I'm going to quadrant 2. Cosine's the x values. I see an x value of negative 1/2 at the angle 2 pi over 3. All right, so basically, sine and tangent. If it's a positive ratio, get that angle from quadrant 1, negative from quadrant 4. Cosine, positive from quadrant 1, negative from quadrant 2. That's what's different about cosine than the others. All right, guys, I hope this cleared it up for you a little bit, some of you that have been sending me questions. All right, if you still have more questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, and have a great day.